Hi, this is going to be a short presentation on the Explain It essay, which you'll be writing this weekend. Note that my subtitle for this essay is Practicing How and Why to Write. There could be a lot of ways to do this. There could be a lot of reasons to do this. And certainly, I hope that you end up writing about something that you really enjoy, that always ends up with writing that is the most interesting and enjoyable for reader and writer both. But in terms of the course, we're doing this right now as a way of practicing how and why we'll want to continue to write as the semester goes forth. A little bit of review: any piece of writing that is effective is a piece of writing that is using and balancing our three rhetorical appeals. These appeals are ways of appealing to a reader or originally listener that go all the way back to the ancient Greeks, thus, the words that are used to refer to these. There is first ethos, that is an appeal based on the self representation of writer or speaker. Basically, if you read something, do you get an impression of the person who wrote it that tells you that they knew what they were talking about and that they were writing for the good of everyone who was going to read it afterwards? There is pathos, an appeal based on the emotional reaction of the reader. This comes down to the fact that the writer has to remember that anything they write will cause an emotional reaction, and that writer then has to be able to take that into account and perhaps work with it at some times and perhaps counterbalance it at other times. Lastly, we have logos, and this looks a lot like logic, which is the word that it's most closely related to. This is our appeal based on the logic of the reasoning or the sense of the writing. We want to keep it simple. I'm going to emphasize this a lot here, and you'll find that I emphasize the simplicity of writing as being really useful in other places too. Academic prose works best when only the necessary words are used. We want to be able to say as much as possible in as few words as possible. The words you use should be simple, straightforward words. The only time to use complex wording is when the subject matter demands it. Otherwise, we don't. Lastly, sentences themselves should be direct and only as long as necessary to communicate the point that's necessary to communicate. Now, take a look at this example of overly complex wording. Here we go. Oil canvas paintings were viewed as the gold standard for art beginning in the Renaissance and ending in the 19th century. The cost to make oil paintings was exorbitant, and as a result, were exclusive to the upper class, thus limiting the scope of art throughout much of society. Now, that's a mouthful, number one. It really does take a lot of trouble to read that and say it. Beyond that, the sentence structure gets to be so long that at least the sentence structure sort of falls apart a little bit and it gets hard to know exactly what the subject of the sentence is. Add to that wording that's unnecessarily complex, and we've got a statement that's just hard to understand. Compare it to this: oil paintings were valued for many years for the fact that they were more true to life than other styles of painting. Since it cost so much money to have oil paintings produced, it was usually only the upper class who owned them. Notice that we're covering the same ground here. We've got the same two ideas about oil paintings and how true to life they are and how much money that they cost. I guess that's three ideas. Sorry. So all the ideas are here, but the wording is different. And because of the fact that the wording is simpler, both the words and the sentences work better to convey the ideas that were always behind the words, but didn't really come across before. What we have then is a balancing act. The potential for subject matter to be complex versus the writer's ability to use simple, straightforward prose is one of these balancing acts. Another is anticipating what the reader is likely to know versus what the reader still needs to be told. A third balancing act is exhaustive detail versus what will interest and inform the reader most effectively. Finally, there is what we know about the topic versus what it set. Excuse me. Lastly, there is the balancing act between what we know about the topic versus what it makes the most sense to say about the topic. All in all, then, as we look at the explain it piece going forward, we want to remember all of these things. We want to have something that we're interested in to write about. We want to make sure that we're keeping our prose as simple and straightforward as possible. And we want to be remembering everything that we talked about in relation to chapter one of the textbook and knowing exactly who our audience is, thinking about having a conversation with them. ultimately creating a piece of writing that is directed to the audience for their benefit. I hope this has been helpful. I hope that it's given you some further idea of the direction to go in for the Explain It piece, and I welcome any further questions you've got. Please let me know if you have those.